Thanks, Chairman, and I welcome the opportunity to be able to make Government's contribution to the Fianna Fáil Shared Maternity Leave Bill 2018. I think the House will know there's a keen interest from all sides and all parties in this House to improve the childminding options open to parents, particularly of younger children. I'm glad, though, of the opportunity to update the House on the work that is underway in Government in relation to supporting families and children, something I think that we all agree is a real priority, because there's a lot of work going on in relation to this area, and tonight is a good opportunity for us to update and reflect upon it. However, first of all, I'll turn to the provisions of this particular bill. The bill as published provides for the amendment of both the Maternity Protection Act of 1994 and the Social Welfare Consolidation Act of 2005 as amended, with a view to 1. Allowing parents to share the minimum period of maternity leave, the 26 paid period provided for under Section 8(1) of the Act of 1994. 2. Providing for the notification requirements where a pregnant employee wishes to transfer part of their entitlement of maternity leave to another relevant parent. And 3. Making corresponding amendments to the Social Welfare Consolidation Act 2005 as amended, to provide that the entitlement under maternity benefit can be transferred to the relevant parent under a brand new scheme known as shared leave benefit, with whom the maternity leave is to be shared. I think some people have expressed a surprise that the Government might seek to oppose this bill, but unfortunately the bill as is constructed at the moment leaves us with no choice. I believe it's regressive, and I genuinely hope that that's not intentional. It's legally flawed with a number of negative consequences for mothers and indeed the relevant parents, which it hopes obviously to give new obligations to, and it's contrary to best practice laid down in the current EU directives. I think, Chairman, in the first instance, the bill is fundamentally regressive. The bill effectively dilutes the security that mothers and their babies have enjoyed up to now in terms of maternity leave, as maternity leave will become a commodity that's subject to negotiation within couples and between a mother and her employer. Inevitably, this will lead to a situation for some women where their employers will put pressure on them to cut short their maternity leave and to return to work. And I don't imagine that's what was intended, and I generally would hope not. But I hope that the members of this House will see that whilst we have other discussions around how employers deal with particular employees in certain circumstances, that this is certainly open to abuse, and we couldn't possibly endorse or encourage a culture that places pressure or an expectation on a woman to forego or cut short that precious time that you have with your baby once your baby is born. That bonding period and that 12 months that we know is so vital and so crucial to the baby's development. So I'd like to expand on just what I mean by some of the things that we find objectionable in it. The bill is absolutely contrary to the Government, and it isn't just this Government, it's previous Government's early years strategy, which seeks to promote breastfeeding for longer periods, and hopefully up to 6 months, as recommended by the international bodies such as the WHO. The objective is best achieved by retaining maternity leave as a right, and that is taken by the mother as a set period, currently 26 weeks, as provided for under the 1994 Act. In essence, this bill could be, depending on the circumstances, considered contrary to the needs of breastfeeding mothers. I think the thing that probably surprises me the most, though, Chairman, is how poorly thought through this bill is, because by maintaining a narrow focus on one particular objective and seeking to change one part of existing legislation, it's actually going to undermine a whole load of entitlements that are currently available in a raft of other legislation. The fact that the bill hasn't been subject to consultation process is problematic, and it's probably the reason that there are significant implications for businesses and families that haven't been thought through. Firstly, if the bill was passed, employers would have to think through their current system of arrangements for organising maternity leave cover, and it may well be more problematic for employers to have more workers absent on maternity leave for shorter periods than for an employer to manage the absence of one female employee for 26 weeks in a block. It may well be easier to get substitute staff for 26 weeks than for 13 weeks, for instance. Secondly, there are a number of technical flaws in the bill which fails to carry over the provisions that protect pregnant workers. It would have to be substantially amended to ensure that the current protections that would be retained for women and men availing of the leave. And thirdly, the bill's approach reduces the protections which are currently in place concerning maternity leave and would create a situation whereby spending time with children would become an issue of maternal choice rather than a right on which the mother can rely, even in a hostile work situation. And for many, I think they would see that as diluting a right that women have fought hard to get and that they currently enjoy. I think if the House could bear with me, I'll give you some of the examples of the protections and right afforded to parents who have recently given birth. Section 14B of the Maternity Protection Act of 1994 provides for the postponement of maternity leave in the event that your child might be in hospital. As per the provisions of this bill, should a pregnant employee transfer their maternity leave to another person, this leave then becomes shared leave. However, though, as this is now shared leave and not maternity leave, and the relevant parent in receipt of the shared leave won't be entitled to postpone the leave if the child is in hospital, as the bill doesn't include any provisions to allow for shared leave to be postponed, and the 1994 Act doesn't recognise shared leave, and there are no changes suggested to make it do so. Also, as a brief overview, Part 4 of the 1994 Act provides specific employment protections to people, mothers, on maternity leave. For example, some of these protections prohibit being terminated or suspended from employment, being unfairly treated if maternity leave is taken during probation, during an apprenticeship, or while on training, and also includes the rights to return to employment and to suitable similar work on the expiry of their maternity leave. Under this bill, maternity leave that is transferred to the relevant parent becomes shared leave for the purpose of the Act, and as such, all of the protections provided for under Part 4 of the 94 Act do not apply to that relevant parent, as the bill makes no provision for the employment rights and protections of those absent from work on shared leave. Furthermore, Chair, the provisions of the bill would result in the state being entirely non-compliant with the long-standing EU legislation concerning the protection of workers who recently gave birth or who are breastfeeding. The bill will breach EU Directive 92/85 EEC, which introduced measures to encourage improvements in the safety and health at work of pregnant workers and workers who have recently given birth or who are breastfeeding. The directive requires that Member States provide for a continuous period of maternity leave, at least 14 weeks, to be allocated to a pregnant employee before and or after the due of birth. And Ireland has long been compliant with this requirement, as we provide 26 weeks of maternity leave, and wouldn't envisage breaching or breaking this directive. However, under this bill, if it was passed, the state would be non-compliant with the requirements of the directive, because the directive states that Member States provide a continuous period of 14 weeks to the pregnant employee and not to anybody else. And I think if it isn't bad enough that it could disadvantage breastfeeding mothers, Chair, this bill would result in an infringement proceedings being taken by the European Commission to the European Courts of Justice, because it would be a clear breach of the directive, and infringement proceedings would have significant financial implications being levelled against the state. Lastly, there will be implications to the Exchequer, because if it's passed, the bill would require that my department develop essentially a brand new system, a brand new scheme which would enable claimants to share a social insurance payment, and that would incur IT, administrative costs, as well as developing a new system, and its operation would take significant time to implement and would need to go behind a long list of progressive measures that are already in the queue. So suffice to say, in seeking to provide one reform, this bill undermines many existing benefits that families, and particularly mothers, already enjoy. Excuse me. The government supports the facts that parents want choice, that parents want flexibility and an opportunity to spend more time with their children, and we believe that the provision of family-related leave is one of the most important areas that's needed to create a balance between family and working life. However, supporting parents and families is not just about providing extra leave in isolation, but rather it's ensuring that there are a range of supports in place. You'll recall, for instance, my colleague, Minister Catherine Sapone, announced €89 million of an increase in our childcare budget from 2019, so that the next year the government, the state indeed, will be investing some €576 million, taxpayers' money, into the support of childcare in this country. I'm also pleased to note that we've delivered on one of the other commitments under the programme for government for families. The deputies will be aware that the free preschool provided on the ECCE programme has been extended as of this autumn, and all children will now be eligible for 2 full years of preschool education before transitioning to primary school. Thank you. There are impressive achievements, and this government is rightly proud of them and committed to helping families of children with disabilities. In this regard, Chair, the government has committed an extra €10 million to the Access and Inclusion model to ensure that children with disabilities can fully participate in ECCE. Indeed, the Department of Justice and Equality has also been instrumental in recent years in improving availability supports to parents. The House will recall my colleague, the former Minister for Justice, Equality and Defence, Alan Shatter, extended parental leave from 14 weeks to 18 weeks, demonstrating the commitment of successive Fine Gael governments to improving supports that are available for parents. On my own behalf and on this current government's behalf, the government introduced paternity leave, the Benefit Act, which provided 2 weeks paid paternity leave for fathers on the birth of their baby. In the first full year of the programme, 2017, almost 27,000 new daddies availed of the leave and the benefit afforded to them under the Act. And the figures that I released last week show that 51,400 daddies have now availed of the scheme since its inception. This level of take-up of paternity leave is an absolutely positive development and represents a real cultural change, and that's something that we need to build on and grow on. But we don't need to do that at the expense of taking from mammies who are at home bonding with their babies. The House will also recall that around this time last year, one of the first things I did as Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection was to introduce legislation that extended maternity leave and maternity benefit in the case of premature births. And more recently, Chair, as part of this year's budget, Government announced the introduction of a new paid parental leave benefit scheme, which will be administered by my department and will commence in 2019. The scheme will initially provide for 2 weeks of paid, non-transferable leave per parent, with a view to expanding it up to 7 weeks in the coming years. And deputies will appreciate that this new paid leave fulfils the commitment in the programme for partnership government to increase paid parental leave in the first year of a child's life. Both the governments and the deputies share the common goal that greater support and flexibility must be provided to families, and it's government's policy to support fathers to assume a greater share of the caring responsibilities for their children through the introduction of paid parental leave. Indeed, the establishment of paid parental leave will enable fathers to become more involved in the care of their young babies without compromising any existing right and entitlement that a woman already has. Government recognises that some women, particularly those who are self-employed, as the Deputy has brought up, might gain from the proposal to share some of their element of their paternity leave. However, I wouldn't be in favour of rushing into legislation that could have serious detrimental impacts on mammies, and furthermore, I'm unsure as to what level of demand these proposed changes have been sprung from, because my officials can recall only one representation being made to the Department in the last 2 years. So rather than proceed with this bill, Government feels that a proper consultation should take place before we proceed to unpick and revisit provisions of the 1994 Act. And I think it would be prudent in the first instance. We need to establish that, first of all, if there is a problem, what exactly the problem is that the deputies are trying to fix, and what we need to do to address the problem without taking away the hard-fought entitlements of mammies in this country already. In conclusion, Chair, I think everybody in this House, whether they be male or female, government, TD or opposition, all share the objective of wanting to support families. This government and every other member are committed to providing every support that we can for parents and families. But the government's key initiative in this policy area is the introduction and extension of paid parental leave for both parents. Our aim is to give more leave, not take away a mammy's special time that she has with her baby. Government will be opposing this bill, not least of which for the ideas that I've just laid out. But because there are fundamental technical and legal issues that make the provisions unworkable. It doesn't take cognizance of existing provisions in the 1994 Act, it breaches long-standing EU directives, and it removes employment protections afforded to parents who take leave following the birth of their baby. In view of the fundamental flaws in the principle of the bill, I don't consider that it can be amended by reasonable amendments, and it's Government's position that we would convey a wrong signal, completely the wrong signal, if we were allowing this bill to proceed. I'm sure none of us wants to introduce measures which would negatively impact on families, and the Government believes that the best way to proceed would genuinely be to have a consultation process, maybe within the guises of the JOC, to find out how prevalent the issue that the deputies are trying to resolve and accept their bona fides, but to find out how prevalent the issue actually is, but to come up with a more practical, a less regressive, indeed a progressive response to the issue that they think is so burning. Thank you, Cathal.
Thank you.